Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, bonjour et bonsoir, wherever you may be. Today, from the 83rd floor of the Petronas Twin Towers, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau, Prime Minister of Canada, to the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation CEO Dialogues. Petronas is proud to be a partner to Canada. Over the years, we have had the honour and privilege of being part of the nation's oil and gas industry, contributing to its economic development and journey towards sustainability. At over 1,300 trillion cubic feet, the sheer scale of natural gas reserves in Canada remain a compelling solution for the world as it navigates this period of energy transition. In line with this belief, Petronas is now the single largest landholder in Montney, and together with our partners in the LNG Canada project, we have participated in what Prime Minister Trudeau himself described as the single largest private sector investment in the history of Canada. Anchored to our shared belief on the potential of natural gas as the cleanest fossil fuel to meet the growing energy demands of the world, we also recognize that more can and indeed needs to be done to extract these valuable molecules in a cleaner and more efficient way. I'm proud to share that this commitment is evident in our Canadian operations. As part of the consortium with the single largest private sector investment project in Canada, we are undertaking deliberate steps to ensure LNG Canada will have the lowest carbon intensity of any large-scale LNG facility in the world once completed. Combined with our position in the North Montney joint venture, we see great potential for Canadian natural gas to be part of the solution for energy transition worldwide. In line with Petronas' own aspiration to achieve net zero carbon emissions by 2050, it is indeed encouraging that together with the Government of Canada, we're accelerating our efforts in adopting and growing practical solutions, as well as making investments in technology that will see us progress in our shared goal of reducing emissions. Ladies and gentlemen, the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau is Canada's 23rd Prime Minister and a leader of a progressive country. The oldest of three boys, Prime Minister Trudeau grew up profoundly influenced by his late father, the late Pierre Elliott Trudeau, and his mother, Madame Margaret Trudeau. In April 2013, Prime Minister Trudeau was elected leader of the Liberal Party, and in 2015, he led his party to victory, winning a majority government with seats in every province and territory across the country. On October 21st, 2019, Prime Minister Trudeau led the Liberal Party to re-election, earning a second mandate from the people of Canada. He is now married to Taufik and they are the proud parents of 3 children. Those are the official facts. But what impressed me most was that he was trained as a teacher. With his background, Canada has a leader that understands the value of passing on a legacy to future generations. This is especially evident in his global leadership on climate change. In his recent virtual address on the occasion of the 75th anniversary of the United Nations General Assembly in September, Prime Minister Trudeau noted that thanks to the pandemic, the world is facing an impending climate reckoning. Therefore, he made it his mission to build back better from the coronavirus pandemic, with climate action as the cornerstone in Canada's economic recovery plan. Prime Minister Trudeau leads a government that has made great strides forward for the country. He is a leader whose vision for strong, inclusive, and sustainable efforts have been manifested in the first gender-balanced cabinet for the country and has set in motion plans to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions by 2050. I believe time does not permit me to elaborate on all of them in detail, but an accomplishment that is indeed laudable is Prime Minister Trudeau's effort in shaping Canada into an exemplary model of a nation, particularly in balancing economic growth with environmental sustainability for a better quality of life. For Petronas, this aspiration strongly resonates with our statement of purpose as a progressive energy and solutions partner, enriching lives for a sustainable future. To this end, we look forward to building on the strong partnership with Canada for many years to come. That being said, will you please join me in welcoming the Right Honourable Justin Trudeau, the Prime Minister of Canada. Merci beaucoup, bonne journée, au revoir.
Thank you, Tengku Mohammed Taufik. Before the fireside chat, I'd like to invite Prime Minister Justin Trudeau for his remarks. Prime Minister, hello from the Lion City.
Thank you for your moderating this event, but I'd like to also thank Mr. Taufik for that kind and warm introduction, and indeed for his tremendous leadership and partnership with Canada. It is good to work with extraordinary leaders around the world on things that improve both our country and our planet. Et merci à tous de me donner l'occasion de m'adresser à vous dans le cadre du dialogue des dirigeants d'entreprise de l'APEC de cette année. This pandemic is truly a global challenge, and not just because every country in every corner of the world has been affected, but because there is no part of society, no industry, no aspect of daily life that has not changed. This is a health crisis and an economic crisis. It is a crisis of inequality and a crisis of trade. These are not small challenges, and this is not the moment for half measures. Around the world, there's a growing consensus that we must think boldly. This is our chance to build back societies that are fairer and economics that are more resilient. And that's what I want to talk about today. In Canada, during the first wave of the pandemic, our government brought in the largest economic measures of our lifetime, measures that helped millions of people directly. For families, it meant the difference between being able to pay rent or having to move out. For businesses, it meant keeping the lights on instead of going under. Cet hiver, nous devons faire face à une deuxième vague de la pandémie. Et comme nous l'avons fait durant la première vague, nous effectuons des investissements judicieux pour nous assurer que personne n'est laissé pour compte. À ce sujet, nous avons prolongé les programmes qui ont permis à de nombreux employeurs de rester en affaires, notamment en les aidant à payer leur loyer ou leurs employés ou en leur accordant des prêts pour créer des emplois. Et notre soutien ne s'arrête pas là. We're focused on supporting Canadians through the coming months while setting people up for success in the coming years. One of the best ways to do that is with real, meaningful action on climate change. I don't have to tell you that global consumers and investors are demanding and rewarding climate action. This is where the world is going, and it's where Canada is going too. Today, our government is introducing legislation that cements our commitment to reach net zero carbon emissions by 2050. This is an ambitious goal, but our kids, our economy, and our future can afford nothing less. Net zero is as much about avoiding the worst impacts of climate change as it is about creating good jobs and a competitive economy for years to come. To reach this goal, we will work with every part of society, including the private sector. Already, many global businesses like yours are leading the way on net zero targets, so let's lead together. If this pandemic has taught us anything, it's that we cannot look inward. To keep people safe, to build a strong and rebuild a strong, resilient economy, we must reach out. La collaboration est la meilleure façon de créer de bons emplois et de favoriser une croissance partagée. C'est aussi la meilleure façon de lutter contre les changements climatiques et de promouvoir le commerce international. Avant la pandémie, notre gouvernement s'était engagé à promouvoir des échanges commerciaux progressistes. Aujourd'hui, plus que jamais, nous savons que c'est la voie à suivre. Already, Canada has negotiated trade deals with partners around the globe, from the new NAFTA to CETA with Europe. And we're continuing to look to new opportunities to expand trade and investment, particularly in the Asia-Pacific. As a country proud of its Pacific coast and a founding member of APEC, we've long worked with Asia-Pacific partners to promote good, progressive trade and defend a rules-based system. We want to ensure that Canadians and Canadian businesses have access to these dynamic markets with huge potential for building shared prosperity. After all, working together just makes good sense. Cities like Vancouver aren't only gateways to the Pacific, they're hubs for Canada-Asia trade. That's why we were one of the first countries to ratify the Comprehensive and Progressive Agreement for Trans-Pacific Partnership. It's also why we're continuing to move forward on exploring the potential for an ASEAN-Canada free trade agreement. By expanding our opportunities in these markets, we can create even more good middle-class jobs and more support for entrepreneurs who drive economic growth. We're unlocking new opportunities, not just for Canadians, but for businesses that choose to invest in Canada. This is Canada's moment to lead, and we want you to lead with us. Now, I know I'm a bit biased, but if I were a global business leader looking for a new market, choosing Canada would be a no-brainer. Because in addition to our strong plan to support people and businesses through this crisis, In addition to our trade deals that unlock access to 2/3 of the global economy, in addition to our incredibly stable banking, judicial, and political systems, even in the middle of a global crisis, on top of all this, the true Canadian advantage is about people. Canada is home to one of the most educated and diverse workforces in the world. And not that there was ever any doubt about their creativity and resilience, but this pandemic has shown once again that Canadians will thrive no matter what life throws at them. Canada is ready for what comes next, and I know you are too. As we see our world changing faster than we could have ever thought possible, as we are called to meet the challenges and the opportunities of this pandemic, we have a chance to build something new. So let's build it together. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. I don't hear her. Haslinda, I think you're on mute, which is sort of the line of 2020.
You're right. Can you hear me now, Prime Minister?
I can hear you now. I don't know how many times that specific interaction has been repeated over the past months, but it reminds us all of yes, our daily reality.
We're going to have a T-shirt with "You're muted." Now, Prime Minister, in your address, you talked about how the pandemic has been a health crisis and an economic crisis, but you failed to say that it has also been a leadership crisis, prompting WHO to come out to say that leading powers need to step up. There's been a vacuum coming at a time when the world is also stumbling on globalization, raising concerns about the future of trade, multilateralism, and supply chains. What a mess the world is in right now. How did we get here?
Well, listen, I think we've all seen evolution of different forces around the world over the past years and indeed over the past decades. But I think what matters is that we understand that there's rarely any zero-sum games, as you said off the beginning, this is a health crisis and an economic crisis. And in the beginning, people thought, oh my gosh, what I need to do to protect the health of my citizens is in direct opposition with what we need to protect the economy. But what we're actually seeing through this pandemic is that, like so many things, they actually go together. The best way to protect the economy is actually to manage the health crisis in the best possible way. That's the way we get to see things bounce back. And similarly, that question around globalization of do we continue to open up or do we hunker down and strengthen our own internal processes? The answer is, well, we have to do a little bit of both. Canada stepped up on manufacturing of PPE, of creating domestic solutions, of understanding that, yes, we do have to reinforce our local capacities. But instead of turning away from trade and globalization, we simply said, oh, it means we have to do more. We have to diversify our supply chains. We need to deepen our cooperations with different parts of the world. So that ability to actually look for the opportunities, the advantages, and the challenges that are being renewed around the world is one, yes, of leadership, but also of vision, and that's very much where Canada is focused.
You know what, Prime Minister? The absence of the U.S. in this time of crisis has been pretty remarkable. Is the pandemic poised to reshape the global power structure?
Well, I think we've seen countries position themselves differently in the in the world, and certainly the United States over the past few years under the current administration has stepped back from multilateralism to a certain extent. But at the same time, that's been a reminder to all of us that we can't just sit back as countries and expect multilateral institutions that have worked very well for the past decades to continue unsupported or unengaged with. And that's where what we've seen with some realignments and challenges to multilateralism is an opportunity and a need for countries to actually step up in a more active way. Whether it's moving forward on the COVAX facility, which ensures that even as Canada secures record amounts of vaccines for ourselves, we're also ensuring that they're going to be available for the world's most vulnerable people. Even as we see that there are tremendous challenges around world trade, Canada stepped up with the Ottawa Group on WTO reform, not just to look at how we can improve things, but how we can create workarounds to systems that are under stress and under challenge right now. So the opportunity for leadership from all of us, not just from the single big players, to shape the future in a much more active way is, I think, the story of these past years, and is certainly going to be the story of the coming decades.
But the big powers do matter. How encouraged are you that President-elect Biden, who's on the cusp of taking power, will lead a different America, an America that is willing to be a global leader?
I think obviously there are going to be differences, and on issues of multilateralism and on issues of fighting climate change, two extremely important issues to global stability. I think President-elect Biden is going to show, strong moves in the right direction. But at the same time, we need to know that it is extremely important for all of us to look for ways to step up. That we can't just sort of sit back and say, okay, Pax Americana is going to be back and everything will be back to the way it was in decades past. We know the world is changing. The center of gravity for the global economy and the places of opportunity is definitively shifting towards the Asia Pacific and towards Asia more specifically. And that's where it is so interesting to me to be deepening and continuing to deepen our ties and our conversations with partners across Asia as we look for new iterations of multilateral structures and cooperation on big issues, from climate change to gender equality to inclusive growth, to the kinds of things that actually really make a difference as people are looking at a transforming world.
But having said that, Prime Minister, even before COVID-19, countries were turning more nationalistic. The US, America first, India, made in India, China now talking about dual circulation, and the UK is poised to crash out of the EU at some point. Has the tide turned, though?
I don't know, really, because, yes, those are all factors, and you could illustrate a whole bunch of different ones. But at the same time, even with a much more protectionistic administration in the United States, Canada was able to renegotiate and strengthen our most important trade deal, NAFTA, in a way that gives better protections to workers, better protections to the environment, better gender balance, and work on defending Indigenous peoples. So, there are always ways to work through changing global leadership and situations to try and do the right thing and move in the right direction. So yes, there are always going to be, and every era thinks that its challenges are the greatest and the worst of any generation of leaders. But every time we just look for different ways to step up, different ways to create not just opportunities for Canadians to be narrow on my interests, but to also say some of the best opportunities for Canadians is when we have good functioning international trade systems, good functioning multilateral cooperation on fighting climate change, good movements towards equality. And there are many, many countries and leaders very interested in exactly those things that we're going to continue to work with, despite forces that sometimes are tugging in different directions. And I think that message that it is time for smaller countries to realize that we all do have a weight and an ability to shape global leadership in meaningful ways for our citizens and our neighbors, that I'm looking forward to the challenges of this 21st century.
We talk about building and being committed to a multilateral order. The U.S. has been pulling back. Under President-elect Biden, what would you like to see for the U.S. to show it is again committed to multilateralism?
Listen, I think obviously President-elect Biden has said the right things and has indicated that his values are towards more multilateralism, more fighting of climate change, and addressing global crises with a very present United States. And leadership obviously matters. But there are lots of domestic pressures that he's going to be facing, along with domestic pressures internally to countries around the world where people are really anxious about globalization, about the future. And anyone expecting a sudden, massive, rapid, shift to the way things were in some idealized past, I don't think anyone can meet those expectations. I think the understanding is there's going to be a lot of work for all of us to do to try and move the world forward in the right direction. And yes, I'm sure that President-elect Biden is going to be a powerful ally in that. But we cannot expect to just sort of sit back and say, okay, the bigger countries are going to do the heavy lifting. We have to understand that each of us has a role to play. Around the UN, for example, Canada is leading a global dialogue and initiative on looking at our international financial institutions, partnered up with Jamaica on looking at how the post-war institutions around financial stability that we've built up through Bretton Woods actually need to be adjusted for the coming decades to recognize very different pressures on smaller countries and on fragile states. Those conversations need to happen regardless of what the U.S. is doing and however the U.S. wants to participate. So there are subjects that we need to continue to work on that we will, and of course, a more active and engaged U.S. will be very welcome in many ways. But it's not suddenly a panacea or a magic wand that's going to change the world back to something that it once was.
Prime Minister, speaking of trade, there's a question here from the CEO of Cedar Crest. And the question is, how will Canada foster a closer trade relationship with ASEAN through private investment, in particular with smaller economies?
Well, we recognize the importance of trade. We're a trading nation. Our presence on the Atlantic and the Pacific, our engagement with the world on natural resources and on services and on diversity of our citizens has always been a tremendous advantage for us. So that's why we're now the only G7 country with a free trade deal with every other G7 country. And that just happened over the past few years as we really stepped up on not just signing trade deals, but making a case for trade, that trade can be good for everyone. We know that trade creates growth, and that's great. That's been long understood. But nothing about that growth automatically gets fairly shared amongst all citizens. And that's where, for smaller countries, for vulnerable populations, there's been a real anxiety around globalization. And that's why the focus we've had as a country over the past years has been trade that works for everyone, trade that recognizes that protections for women, protections for the environment, protections for labor standards, as we move forward with on the CPTPP, for example, are the kinds of things that give reassurance and buy-in even to smaller countries. And that's where having trade rules that are respected, having deals that are signed, are not just about creating opportunities, but about creating protections for smaller economies that otherwise can get pushed around by some countries with increasingly coercive diplomacy. We need to make sure we are there to support each other because, as this pandemic has shown, we're all in this together. So I'm very excited about the conversations we've been having over the past years about a Canada-ASEAN trade. We've been working very closely with many partners on increasing investments from Canada into countries that have growing economies, and we want to deepen those ties. I know that there's a lot of interest in using Canada as a staging point for companies that want to grow into the West, and we're certainly there to participate and support.
There is a related question here. How will your government ensure inclusive trade, that it benefits everyone across the board, and especially across marginalized segments of the community like women, like immigrants?
Well, I think that's the story that says that as we talk about trade deals, We're no longer just talking about opportunities for big companies or multinationals to move goods and capital easier around the world. I mean, that will be part of it, and that does create growth. But how we actually move to make sure that small businesses can benefit from international trade deals has been a huge topic of conversation in Canada, even before this pandemic. We made our international trade minister also our Minister of Small Businesses, because we know, and it's even more real in the pandemic, as we go online, as we do things more virtually and connected with the world, there are opportunities through this pandemic, and there is a need to be there as we move forward. And even as we look to support more and more small businesses playing on a global field, how we support Indigenous businesses, how we support women, how we support workers and marginalized communities needs to be built in, because what we've seen is when globalization hasn't worked for ordinary citizens, that support for globalization is pulled back, and we see pressures towards protectionism that actually leave us all poorer. The fact that trade creates growth isn't going to be an argument to convince someone to support trade as a voter if none of the benefits from trade go to them, if they are not protected. And that's what Canada has been so focused on in terms of progressive trade deals. And our measures in NAFTA, our measures in the free trade deal that we have with Europe, our measures that we proposed and strengthened the TPP with are exactly the kinds of things that make sure we're bringing people along towards a brighter future, despite all the transformation in the global economy.
Speaking of trade deals, Bloomberg ran a story today, Prime Minister, that Canada and the UK may be on the brink of a new trade agreement to replace the existing one. Can you confirm this?
I'm not going to make any announcements today, but I will say that we're continuing to work very closely with all sorts of allies. We know the UK made a very significant decision in withdrawing from the European Union, but it has been a priority for me and for us to make sure that there is a seamless transition for Canadian investors, for British investors, and we are very optimistic that that's going to happen.
Earlier, you talked about how there's been a pushback to globalization, and that's led to talk, of course, of decoupling a bipolar world. How about a tripolar world? What's your view on that? The US, Europe, Asia Pacific, all with their own supply chains. Is it inevitable in the end?
I don't think so. I think obviously we're seeing different polar tensions going through the economy right now, but we're a very, very small world when you look at supply chains, when you look at how interconnected we are. There's anything that has shown that, it's this pandemic. And even the differences just from the 2008 global crisis to this one in terms of how much more connected we are just 12 years later has really highlighted that we're not going to be turning back the clock and closing things down. What we do need to make sure that we are doing is properly aligning interests and opportunities for citizens. That as we get people more plugged in and more aware, that they understand that, yes, richer and diversified supply chains are really important. One of the great examples of that for me is actually what Canada's doing around critical minerals. I mean, we know that Canada's always had mines and forests and energy and great natural resources that have been a benefit for us on the world stage. And over the past years, we've done a lot of investing in the knowledge economy. We're one of the global leaders on AI. We're doing tremendous investments into cybersecurity, into transforming the economy towards digital. But at the same time, we're not forgetting that, for example, natural resources and critical minerals specifically are essential to the technologies we rely on in the future. And developing Canada as a reliable and secure source of critical minerals that aren't always reliable from other global partners is something that is of interest to the world. And that's a direction that we're taking that actually matters. And indeed, as more and more companies are saying, you know what? Aluminum is aluminum, but I want to be able to tell my consumers that I have the cleanest aluminum around. Well, suddenly people say, wait, Canada produces the cleanest aluminum in the world, and we're about to get even better with this ELYSIS process. We want Canadian aluminum in our supply chain. We want batteries made from Canadian lithium. We want Canadian uranium, because we know that that comes with a value-added proposition that people can actually recognize. And it's not just sourcing the cheapest minerals around the world and not turning a blind eye to some of the labor and environmental standards around it. It's knowing that we can start to have it all. And that is Canada's brand as a place that does things right, and at a time where people around the world, whether it's individuals or companies, want to be on the side of progress and good guys and doing things right and competitively. And that's where Canada is really excited about the future.
You talked about how supply chains are pretty much smaller than you think. What do you make of the recently concluded RCEP deal? Would Canada consider joining it at some point?
We have always looked at trade as being extremely important. I'm very interested in the RCEP deal. I think it's going to be a game changer in Asia and has potential impacts around the world. So we're going to watch carefully. I think it'll be interesting to see how China behaves as a part of that trade deal, because we've seen China position itself in some very challenging ways on the world stage these days. Canada is deeply disappointed with some of the positions that China is taking, including the arbitrary detention of 2 of our citizens. But we also know that it is an important player in the global economy that we need to try and include and get to play by better international rules. So if the RCEP deal is able to actually start to create level playing fields, that's going to be something very, very interesting. So we're going to watch carefully, but Canada's always up for creating better and fairer trade, not just for our citizens, but for the world.
I'm glad you brought up China, because Canada has been in the crosshairs with China. What will it take to get that relationship to a more neutral path, neutral stance? And do you want that in the first place?
Oh, I think we all recognize that China's growth and its importance in the global economy is something that we need to work with. We need to figure out how to create benefits for ourselves, our workers, our producers, but also to see economic growth happen around the world. It's just that we need to make sure that that's being done properly, that the rules are being played by. And when China has arrested 2 Canadians for purely political reasons, that endangers our relationship and our ability to move forward in a constructive way as we want to. And I think one of the things that we're pleased to see is there is an increasing working together of like-minded nations around the world who are concerned with China's more aggressive, coercive diplomacy, and trying to highlight that it's obviously not in our interests to see China be aggressive in all these different levels of consequences for trade deals and consequences for citizens. But we're also needing to push back on human rights, whether it's the concerns with the behaviors in Hong Kong or the situation of the Uyghurs. We need to work together as a world to say that not only is this not in the world's interest, it's actually not in China's interest to continue to behave in a way that is trying to use its weight to get its way. That's not something that's going to be constructive even for China's own people and economy in the coming years. And the more we can pull together as countries that respect the rule of law and say that, we're all for more economic growth and opportunity, but we need to know that people are going to play by the rules. That's the direction the world needs to go in.
Prime Minister, can Canada afford to pick fights with China? I mean, what are the risks to your country from antagonism with China, given the hit to your economy?
Well, I think, first of all, Canada is not seeking to be antagonistic with anyone. But we will always stand up for our interests and for the protection of our citizens. I think that's what every country needs to do. And in the face of pressure and increasingly coercive moves by one of the world's great powers, I think that really highlights at which point we need to be working together as allies, as neighbors, as friends, as countries that know that singly very few countries could stand up on its own to a superpower, to a great power. But working together in alignment, we can actually make sure that there is a recognition that the path that China is choosing to take right now is probably not going to be as effective even for them as they think it will.
How effective do you think nations can be in countering China by joining hands? You have Canada, you have India, Japan, perhaps coming together to put pressure on China.
I think, there's two aspects of it. Obviously, all of us trying to work together to say, no, we just want the rules to be respected. We want people to respect the rule of law. We want not to see, political decisions impact the safety of our citizens or the smooth flow of trade. And highlighting that is something that I think does make a difference as we pull together. Obviously, the more countries pull together, the more impactful we'll be. But at the same time, we're also seeing challenges internally to China where people are wondering if the track they're on is indeed the right one. And I think that, as much as anything else, is going to cause the Chinese government to reflect on its path. This year we've celebrated or noted anyway the 50th anniversary of Canada's engagement with China. My father, when he was Prime Minister, was one of the first Western leaders to open relations with China and to work with China on engaging with the global community in constructive ways. I think there's a time right now where all of us together need to reflect on how we can ensure that the world we're building and the future we're building includes a set of agreed upon rules where might isn't necessarily right, but smaller countries have a right to fairness in the way they're being treated.
Do you regret getting involved in the U.S. extradition issue of Amin from Huawei? In hindsight, should Canada have just stayed out of it?
Do I regret that Canada followed its laws? Do I regret that Canada lived up to a long-standing extradition treaty with our closest ally? Absolutely not. Canada is a country of the rule of law, and obeying those laws can't just be when it's convenient or when it's easy. If you're a country of the rule of law, if you're a country of values, you need to stick up for those. And that's exactly what we're doing. It is unfortunate that we're in this situation, but Canada is a country that believes in following the rules and particularly our own rules, and we will continue to. And I think that's one of the things that that needs to be emphasized on the world stage, that regardless of what some countries think of how they can adjust their judiciary or their rules, Canada is a country that will always defend the rules, even when it's difficult to do so.
Prime Minister, I'd like to pivot a little, a lot, to climate change, actually. The question here from the CEO of Petronas, whom we heard from earlier, what will be Canada's stance in balancing the delicate trade-off between climate action and economic sustainability?
Well, I think, first of all, our position is it's not a trade-off at all. The only way you can actually build a strong economy for the future is by protecting the environment, by fighting climate change. That debate has long since passed. There still are, pockets of the world where you can hear it still debated. But for me, for this government, it's entirely settled. The question is, how best do we build the economy? How best do we harness the transformation around climate change, fighting climate change, to position ourselves well for the coming years? And that's exactly what Canada has done. We brought in a price on pollution, and I won my most recent election based partially on that debate and on imposing a price on pollution right across the country. We're moving forward today with legislation that enshrines net zero by 2050 as a fundamental policy for the country. When I got elected in 2015, about 1% of Canada's coastal waters were protected. In 5 years, we've got to 14%, and we're on our way to 25% because we know that conservation of ecosystems is a key part of not just fighting climate change, but of sustainable economies. We know we have tremendous opportunities, even as a country that is geographically the second largest in the world, and quite frankly and honestly is still a producer of fossil fuel energy and will continue to produce fossil fuel energy for many more years. But how we transform that, how we bring in new technologies, how we shift our energy mix to create more renewables with the revenue we're generating now while the world still is reliant on fossil fuels is all part of how we ensure good jobs and opportunities in an increasingly competitive, globally cleaner world. These are the things that I'm excited about for the future, and this is what Canada's very much focused on as we both fight climate change, protect the environment, and create good jobs that'll be sustainable long into the future.
Is there real traction? Is there enough political will? We've heard China, Korea, Japan all committing to being net zero by 2050, 2060. Is this for real, Prime Minister?
It is for real because it is not just the right thing to do. It's not just around taking the moral position of caring about future generations. It's going to get traction, and it is getting traction because it's the economically smart thing to do. The growth of the green economy, the growth of clean technologies, the growth of opportunities for better energy efficiency and greater solutions that actually protect our environment is where the world is going. And we're seeing it with global investors actually really making hard decisions around ESG investing. Companies looking at which country is actually moving things in a way that being greener faster is actually a competitive advantage for building and manufacturing. I mean, we've recently seen a number of significant automakers choose to set up shop in Canada because of electric vehicles and our potential for battery supply chains and the high quality of workforce and all the technology and AI we have advances in Canada. There is an understanding that this is the way the world is going, and those who move quickly and assuredly will draw the greatest economic benefits. And that's what Canada is doing.
Prime Minister, we have just a couple of minutes left, and no conversation is complete without the mention of President Trump. Even towards the tail end of his presidency, the Trump administration is still taking a lot of action. He's fired a number of officials. He's pulled more troops out of Iraq, out of Afghanistan. He's threatening more action against China. Is Trump a real risk to the world in the coming months before he leaves office?
My job is and has been to stand up for Canadian interests, to stand up for Canadian values. And through the past 4 years of this administration, that's exactly what we've done. And it obviously hasn't always been easy or predictable, but we got a lot of really big things done, including renegotiating NAFTA with a deal that works very much for Canada. So we know that my job as Canadian Prime Minister is to work with the American administration. I will keep working with the American administration as we move forward to January 20th, and after which I will work with the Biden administration. So I think there are always moments of unpredictability in the world, because of different things. The question is how we manage it, and I think there's an example in how Canada has been able to sustain and grow a really important relationship, even in a time of protectionism and unpredictability.
Like you said, you've navigated some tricky winds with Trump on trade, even reject NAFTA. You and Trump did not see eye to eye on many issues, refugees, climate, and so on and so forth. So you expect your relationship with President-elect Biden to be different?
Yes, it'll be different. Every successive president has
more agreements, perhaps.
I think there are some things that we will be more aligned on. There are other things that will remain challenging, and that is ever the case with our largest trading partner in Canada, as we have through generations of successive prime ministers and presidents. We will continue to put the interests of Canadians first, understanding that often the interests of Canadians align with the interests not just of everyone in North America, but with everyone around the world.
Before we wrap it up, just one final question. I mean, we've been talking about how it's been a challenging time for the world. What gives you the biggest hope?
As always, it is individuals. It is how people have stepped up in their communities in a very difficult time to do the right things, to hunker down, to manage to get through this pandemic so far. How people have been there to lean on each other, how people are continually optimistic that tomorrow is going to be better than today, even in the darkest times. We have seen the impact of this pandemic with just untold tragedies, not just in Canada, but around the world. But at the same time, people are resilient, people are forward-looking, and Canadians are, as always, positive about the opportunity to build an even better tomorrow than yesterday was, despite these challenges. That's what gives me hope, that people everywhere in Canada and around the world are ready to roll up their sleeves and work for a better world. And that's the opportunity and the responsibility we have as leaders, to bring out the best in people, to pull people together, and to keep this world on the right track.
Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, we thank you for being so generous with your time today. Thank you, sir.
It's a real pleasure. And again, I look forward in future years to seeing many of you in person, but virtually is still a nice way to connect. So thank you all for this initiative, and pay attention to Canada and come join us as we build a better future.
Thank you, Your Excellency Prime Minister Trudeau, for that very positive presentation, and thank you to Haslinda, Amin. We'd like to inform everyone that the next session, Empowering Women for Economic Recovery, will begin 45 minutes later than scheduled. That is 6:30 in Kuala Lumpur, 17:30 in New York, 6:30 in Beijing, 11:30 in Auckland, and 22:30 GMT. We'll see you then.